Our next speaker is an academician, politician, jurist, and activist, and has a prolific background. Doctorate in economics from Harvard. He has been a professor at Harvard and IIT Delhi and has worked closely with Nobel laureates. He has authored several world-class books and has been instrumental in formulating policies which enabled the Indian economy to embrace liberalization and globalization. He has been elected to the parliament 5 times and has been member of the Planning Commission and was a member delegate of the United Nations to develop economic cooperation between developing countries. From advocating self-sufficiency for the Indian economy to shaping its international relations, his contributions are immense. To share with us on India, the rising role of judiciary and the way forward, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the first expert speaker on the CEO track 2013. Please put your hands together for Dr. Subramanian, Swamy.
Thank you very much. Today I'll briefly deal with, in the 20 minutes presentation, followed by questions, on what role judiciary is playing in the determination of our policies, particularly economic policies. I'd like to begin by saying that the biggest story of India today is the enormous potential that it possesses. All that it needs is an appropriate leadership and policy that is directed to exploiting this potential. We have today the youngest population amongst the large countries. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. The average age of India, or an Indian, is 27 years. The average age of a Chinese is 37, because they pursued fanatically the one-child policy, one-child per family policy. The average age of an American is 38. The average age of European is 47. The average age of Japanese is 50. It's the most aging population. Everyone knows that economic growth is primarily fueled by new innovations. Capital and labor certainly are factors of production, but the multiplier is innovation. If you see the effect the innovation of internet has created in the world, you can see how much difference it has made to the way we used to do things. The same thing with jet engines, telexes, earlier on electricity, before that Bessemer steel furnaces, locomotives, railways. So the key is innovation. And innovation is generally designed and formed by young populations coming fresh out of the universities. So if you have such a huge young population, if you can educate them to become innovators, then India would be a leading country in the world in a very short time. Already we have demonstrated capacity. The Deming Prize for automobile ancillaries is year after year won by Indian companies. The Indian software companies whose grading is done by the SCI CMM ranking in terms of quality, the rank 5, which is the highest, Indian companies are the largest. United States is far below. Indian companies today qualifying would be in the range of 35, 36 companies who provide software in that grading. Same thing, and in the case of the Chinese, till recently they didn't have any. Today they have one company which meets that standard. So Indians, of course, are generally performing very well, everywhere except in India. And that is the issue that I want to deal with. So a future policy would be on how to design your educational system to bring out the best amongst the Indians. The second thing is the enormous potential you have in agriculture. You can become the global exporter of the world in agriculture if you focused your mind on that. We have the fortune of being able to do agriculture 12 months of the year. Many countries cannot do agriculture for more than 5, sometimes 7 months, because there's so much snowfall in their country. So this country, India being a country which is capable of doing agriculture for 12 months of the year, can easily grow 3 crops a year. But in only 25% of the land, we grow more than one crop. The yield per acre in India is amongst the lowest in the world. But at the same time, the experimental plots of the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, we produce on the same conditions that prevail in India, the same quality land, by just providing the right amount of seed, water, etc. We are able to achieve 7 times the yield that the ordinary farmer in India is able to achieve. And yet the price of agricultural products internationally is amongst the lowest. Rice is perhaps sold at 1/7 the price in South Africa or Japan. Wheat prices are also similarly 1/3. Milk prices, for example, is 1/15 that of Europe. And we have 150 million cows. They are giving an average of only 200 liters per year. An average Israeli cow gives you 11,000 liters per year. So imagine if our 150 million cows started giving the Israeli average, we will all be coming here swimming in milk. That much milk we'll be able to produce. So this land of potential, and it's a question of how to realize this potential. At the same time, we have a value system, and the value system includes democracy, the rule of law. And it is here that the judiciary is increasingly started playing a role. Many people find it obstructionist, they feel that it is holding up development, and so on. I think from my dealing with the judiciary, a new hope has been created in the country that we can clean up our system and in fact meet and solve those problems which we were thought were intractable. For example, corruption. Only 10 years ago, it was common talk that India, everyone is corrupt, and there's no way a person in office can ever be prosecuted. That perspective has now changed. So how did this happen? And what is the role of the judiciary? The judiciary originally was designed, the Supreme Court, for example, was designed to be an appellate body. People have disputes, 2 people have disputes. They come to the courts, and they try to settle their dispute. They lose in one court. We have a 3-tier system, and then they go to the High Court, and then they go to the Supreme Court. This was the system we had. But over the years, when the judges found that the Constitution had given them certain powers which they could interpret to benefit the public. So the first time this happened was in 1981, when some bonded laborers living in semi-slavery had no voice to express because they were so poor and they were living miserably in quarrying, mining, in many other places, in around Delhi itself. So one person went to the court, straight to the Supreme Court under Article 32, which is fundamental rights, and he said, I am not the one who's suffering for anything, but I am here because those who cannot speak, I'm come on their behalf. The Supreme Court agonized over this question, and for the first time they introduced a petition called the public interest litigation, where those who cannot approach courts can have any other citizen who is in a position to approach courts represent them, even though he is not himself affected by it. Earlier on, the judiciary principle was that if you are affected by something personally, then you come to the court for redressal. Now it became, well, if your fundamental rights are affected, but you don't have access to the courts, you don't have the money to hire lawyers, then anyone else can represent you and get you your rights. That's how the public interest litigation began. And therefore the courts, which were originally very small, for example, the Indian Supreme Court began with only 7 judges. That was the constitutional mandate. But then Parliament was empowered to amend that, and it amended it. And slowly the size of the Supreme Court is increasing, and now it is 31 judges. And now people feel the Supreme Court should have branches in every state. In fact, if you see today's newspapers, this has been vigorously argued. Whether that is possible or not, I certainly think the Supreme Court is going to get bigger and is not going to get any smaller. Now, after that, the Government of India, through Parliament, passed in 1988 a law called the Prevention of Corruption Act. In that, there was one novel provision. It was the usual anti-bribery law, which exists in everywhere. There's there even in the Indian Penal Code. But they introduced one novel section, which was recommended by the Law Commission, and Mr. Rajiv Gandhi brought it into legislation. And that was that if a person holding a public office, like a minister or a secretary, he enables somebody to make pecuniary gains which is not in the public interest, then he is liable to be prosecuted for corruption, even though he has not taken a bribe. Earlier on, it was always that you can be prosecuted for corruption if you had taken a bribe. But now it was extended to public officials who didn't take a bribe, but took a policy decision which was not in the public interest, and thereby some people earned pecuniary gains. That was prosecutable. That is precisely what I used in the 2G spectrum scam. In the 2G spectrum scam, the 122 licenses were awarded to 9 companies. 122 licenses because each region had a separate circle. So some companies had, of course, more than one license, but in different regions. There was no all India license in that sense. So 122 licenses were issued out of a total application of 574. And this was the largest ever received of applications, and that too after a cutoff date. And that cutoff date was abruptly announced. Even then, 574 applications came in. And out of that, 109 companies were selected for 122 licenses. Now, what happened in that? The 2 ministers were authorized by the cabinet to make the decision that at what price the spectrum should be sold. Ideally, what they should have done is auction the spectrum. But they did not auction the spectrum. They decided, the government decided, that they will give it on some principle, for example, first come, first served. Because if you knew the minister, you can go and sit in his office and become first come, because you're there already ahead of time. There was, not like others who had to rush in when the announcement was made. But that's a minor part. The major part was that it was decided as a public policy by 2 ministers empowered by the cabinet to decide on this technical subject, rather than it come to the cabinet, what the price of spectrum should be. And they decided that it will be the price prevailing in 2001 when the NDA was in power, and the NDA had auctioned the spectrum and found the market price to be 680 crore rupees for a 4 megahertz spectrum license. Now, on that basis, they selected 9 companies. Of them, 2 of them were real estate companies which didn't even have a single tower. But they were sitting in the minister's office when the announcement was made, so they got the license first and second. 2 companies, one was called Swan and the other was called Unitech. Now, the argument given that time is that this policy of ours that that we want tariffs for the mobiles to be low, and therefore we're giving the spectrum at a low price. Well, that's fine as a policy, but the only thing that happened is that all these companies which got the licenses cheap at 2001 prices, when in 2008 the market price was about 10 times that, because the number of mobile phones in India from 2001 increased from 440 million to 700 million. So the demand was enormous, and therefore the price of spectrum had gone up 10 times. But they gave it at 1/10 the price. It would have been fine as a policy, but for the fact that many of the companies, 2 of these companies which are real estate companies, had no intention of starting telecom industry. They went and sold their equity to foreign companies at 8 times the price they brought from the government of India. So they made a killing without doing any work, or except that they happened to be in the minister's room before the licenses were handed out, and they became the first and second recipient of it. They used their influence, and the minister, having drafted policy, gave them the license. Now, these people then sold it. Some others also sold it. The Tatas didn't sell the whole, they sold a part of their equity to Docomo. Somebody sold it to Sistema, etc., etc. All of them made pecuniary gains by selling a part of the license or the whole of the license to foreign companies. Had the government of India, instead of selling it at 2001 prices, had sold it at market prices or 8 times the price or 10 times the price to foreign companies to begin with, then the government of India would have got an additional revenue of close to, by then exchange rate, $40 billion. So instead of that, they got 1/10 of it. And this was a loss to the country, and therefore this policy was not in the public interest. So the 2 ministers should have been prosecuted. One of them definitely was prosecuted. His name is he's the telecom minister. But the other minister so far has escaped my clutches, who happens to be the finance minister of India today. And he was the finance minister at that time too. Both of them decided, so if one goes, the other should have gone also. But it's not happened so far. But I'm not giving up till it happens. Now, here, this puts a huge burden on those who make policy, that please don't use your discretionary powers arbitrarily. And this is what happened, and thereby cause a loss. The Supreme Court accepted this argument and cancelled all the licenses and said, resell them under auction. And that process is on. Next, the Supreme Court went a little further and formulated in what is now known as the Tata Telecom case, where they said, if your rights are denied and you are not in a position to come to the courts, you come through somebody. Anyone, any well-meaning person can come and say, I'm coming for that. For instance, in the bonded labor case, such a thing happened. Now, in the Tata Telecom case, the Supreme Court formulated a new principle, that we will not interfere with policy making of the government. We are not a second government. But if the decision-making process is arbitrary, unreasonable, malified, or illegal, we can enter into the picture and say that this decision-making process is wrong, so the choice is also wrong. While if you just come and say this policy is not good for the country, you cannot interfere. We will not interfere. But if you come and say that the process by which you made the decision was arbitrary, unreasonable, or illegal or malified, then we will interfere. This happened in a matter that I brought before the Supreme Court called the Setu Samudram project. In that, the decision was taken to cut a canal through the ocean floor in Park Strait and the Gulf of Mannar, bordering, the portion of sea water which is between India and Sri Lanka, and cut through a bridge that we in India, large numbers of Indians who are of Hindu faith believe was constructed under Lord Ram's direction by Hanuman and his tribesmen, and that's called the Ram Setu. It is still visible there, it still exists, you can see it. Now, many of the religious people went to court and said this offends our religious sensibilities, and therefore the policy should be scrapped. And the Supreme Court said, no, we will not enter into it. This is a policy decision, we will not enter. And they dismissed the top Shankaracharyas, the top sadhus, giant, all the giants of the spiritual world had signed a petition together. The Supreme Court didn't accept. Then they came to me, maybe because my name is Swamy, so they may think that I was also Swamy. So they asked me whether I would help, and I felt that it was very difficult. So I went back to court and I said that building a canal is a good thing. I'm not opposed to it, especially if you don't have to go around Sri Lanka. But there are many routes that could be there. There could be, after all, if you don't want to, the objective is not to go around Sri Lanka, then convert Tuticorin port into an international container port. Let the ships come and dock there, put their containers there, and then let there be a railway line along the coast all the way to Calcutta. And I showed that was cheaper and more employment generating, more development oriented than this. Or you could, instead of cutting through Ram Setu, you could, because Ram Setu is not the whole span from between India and Sri Lanka. There is a portion called the Rameshwaram Island, and then from the middle of the ocean, middle of the Park Strait or Gulf of Mannar, the Ram Setu starts and goes to Sri Lanka. So I said, instead of going through Ram Setu, you go through the Rameshwaram Island and cut through that, and then, you have not even considered it. So the decision to go through Ram Setu was an arbitrary decision. It was not based after considering all the alternatives. And the decision was taken arbitrarily, and I said there was also a malified, because Mr. Karunanidhi, who was the main proponent of this, was an atheist. And therefore, there was a malified intention to disparage the name of Lord Ram, and that's why he insisted on this route. And therefore, on malified also, it should be rejected. And it is unreasonable when you have got a cheaper route, cheaper way of doing it. Why should we take this expensive route, where you have to dredge the canal every week? Because even after the canal is on the floor of the ocean will go on putting mud on it or sand on it, and you will have to dredge it every week. It's another matter, of course, that the shipping minister's son had a dredging company, and it was getting the contract, which meant 1,000 crores a year for just dredging the Setu Samudram project. The court then decided that, yes, I had made out a case for scrapping the project. But then the government came up and said, we will consider an alternative route and come back. They have come back after a Pachori committee report said that this whole project is an environmental disaster and should not be touched. So the government is just hoping to get adjournments after adjournments in the court so that the next election can come and maybe a next government is saddled with this responsibility of scrapping the project. Now, I'm saying here, the new principle was adopted, that if your policy decision making is arbitrary, unreasonable, illegal, or malified, any of them, then the courts can interfere. And so now the courts are entering not into policy decisions. You can't tell the court that this policy is wrong. But if you say it is done this way, then they can interfere. Now, illegality is another example. Recently, I've gone to court on this Air Asia joint venture with the Tatas. Now, the rule says very clearly, only existing airlines can receive foreign direct investment from a foreign airline. But here there is no existing airline. Only Mr. Tata, his grandfather maybe was had run a, or his Mr. J.R.D. Tata did run an airline which was taken over by the government, but he runs no airline. So how can he accept foreign direct investment? In fact, in this case, there is no foreign direct investment. It is Mr. Tata who is investing in the project, and the money is going from him. So I have gone to the court. The court, Supreme Court, said that yes, you have a strong case, but why you come straight to us? You go to the High Court and then come to us, because we would like to have the benefit of the High Court. So I am going to the High Court next week, and I'm 100% certain that the project will be scrapped. Now, this leads me to the question, are the courts obstructing economic development? First of all, I want to say that our principle has to be, whatever is to be done must be done legally. If your laws are not properly drafted, change the laws. I have been a proponent of market economy for years and years. Ever since I've been, to my recollection, I have been against authoritarian systems, I've been against government control and so on. I've opposed it. I've paid heavy price for opposing the communist methods of doing things. When the Russians were very popular in this country, I was a very unpopular figure because the Russians ran a huge campaign against me on that. And of course, I was vindicated. The Russians were doing, and the communists in India were doing propaganda that Russia was a heaven, Soviet Union was a heaven. There is no unemployment in Soviet Union. There is no poverty in Soviet Union. There is no inflation in Soviet Union. Now there is no Soviet Union, thank God. And we have 16 different countries. The Soviet Empire has disintegrated. And at that time, we got only 3.5% rate of growth. And I became a Minister of Commerce at a time when India was in the crisis of foreign exchange in the 1990-91 period. And at that time, my Commerce Secretary was Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. And the then Prime Minister, Mr. Chandrasekhar, asked me who would be the best economic advisor for us. So I recommended Manmohan Singh's name, who had migrated to Switzerland, to Geneva for one of the international organizations. We brought him back. He was the economic advisor. He was a very good economic advisor, and I think he should have remained that way. But the fact is that the economic reform documents were prepared at that time. And many people thought that India can achieve no more than 3.5% rate of growth. They used to call it the Hindu rate of growth. But it was proved wrong by deregulation. Just by deregulation, the country went to heights of 9% and so on. And today, I would say, if we focus on innovations, if we continue to improve, we get world-class infrastructure, and we deregulate at the state level, We rectify our past systems, which is not difficult. The potential of India is such that we can become a developed country in a very short time. We can grow, in fact, at 12 to 13% per year for at least 10 years at a stretch. But it should be done legally and not arbitrarily, not unreasonably, and not with malified intentions. Then the judiciary would be an assistant, would be supportive, would be favorable for the economic development country. We don't want a buccaneer economy. We don't want an economy where those who engage in illegalities, in illegal political influence, to become the leaders of our industry. We want this country to be in a situation where every citizen is in a position, if he has the knack, he has the risk-taking attitude, to be able to stand on his own feet and start an industry. So I consider judiciary has done a great favor to the Indian psyche. It has done a great favor to lay the ground rules for how economic development should proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, inviting you to please raise your hand and we'll have a mic brought on over to you.
Sir, thank you for your sharing your views very candidly. My name is Ashutosh. I work with Motilal Oswal. So the question I have in mind is, right now there is a complete aversion of investor community to invest in business which has anyway directly or indirectly to do with the government.
Yeah.
And the reason is very simple. All the investors shied away from investing in businesses with the government till, Vajpayee government did a very good job of doing something in the road business. So in the boom of 2004 to 2008, a bucket load of money from private equity investors as well as capital market investors came into projects which were basically dealing with the government. Now, my question to you, sir, is very simple, is that almost 80 to 90% of that value has got completely eroded. So there is no confidence in doing that exercise ever again. Now, are these apprehensions a little misfounded? Or do you believe that the nature of our polity structure and the judiciary is such that investor class should completely stay away from business with the government?
Well, I think governments have played very positive roles in many countries. The case of Japan and MITI is an example. Even in China, they play a very positive role. What we need is a government where discretionary power of the government servant is minimal. And therefore, further reforms are absolutely necessary. I'm saying that what has happened in the last 10 years, which may have caused some misgivings, is all rectifiable. I would certainly think that some of the issues that are impinging on policy has got to do with issues like corruption. It's got to do with feeling that you can win the voters to your side by doing these ad hoc projects, and forgetting that this can cause tremendous fiscal damage to the country. But again, I'm saying that the Indian history shows that whenever we get into a crisis, we come out very well out of it. In fact, a crisis off and on for India is a good thing, judging by our history. Take, for example, the Soviet model was designed on the principle that you squeeze agriculture to finance industry. There was nothing to squeeze because the British had taken out all the money through the zamindari system that was there in agriculture. So therefore it collapsed. As a consequence, we had to beg for food on what the Americans used to call a mouth to the ship. That is, we were waiting for American ships to dock so that the next consignment food can come. But that crisis ultimately led to the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution is perhaps an exaggerated term, but even the 10% of the farmers who benefited by it were able to produce so much that by 1975, India was in a position to export food. Today, the same thing. If we can empower our people to do their own thing without undue interference, this country can regenerate very quickly. And I would suggest some steps where people's confidence can be revived quickly. Because today it's no use saying, I'm going to follow this policy and it will filter down to you in 4 or 5 years, etc. People want some results quickly. And I would advocate abolition of personal income tax as a way of encouraging people to invest more, save more, and therefore invest more. Or if you think that is too radical, you can always say that anyone who saves in recognizable forms like bank deposits, share certificates, etc., that amount will be totally deductible for income tax. But then that means paperwork, and I'm against paperwork, except when it's absolutely necessary. And certainly I would not like paperwork where income tax officers are involved. They've been spoiled over the years. And therefore, it's better that for some time, even corporate tax, the corporation tax should be abolished. And we can make up that money in two ways. One is, if this is done, people are not going to splurge with their money. They are going to save that money. It will become part of investment, therefore become part of growth. And second, all these resources, natural resources we have, which today we are handing over for a song, if you start auctioning them, you will get enormous amount of money. And if the government is really honest government, and it brings back the money that is deposited illegally in foreign bank accounts, and that can be done now thanks to the, surprisingly, to the terrorist attack in the New York towers as a consequence of which, the so-called 9/11 attack, as a consequence of which the Americans today have broken the back of secret banking quite substantially. There are a number of resolutions of the United Nations which we can use. And India has got $1.5 trillion in illegal foreign bank deposits. So there is no shortage of resources. So rather than harass the people who are particularly in the professional classes, the middle classes, through this income tax system, we should have these steps which immediately make people confident something new is going to happen and something new has started happening. That is the way we do, and I don't think that the general public in this country is pessimistic. They just want a change, and the change is coming.
Sir, I've got a question. This is Surjit Mishra from Bajaj Capital. Now, this question is regarding Supreme Court's intervention sometimes, which may or may not be benefiting the industry. I'll take your attention towards the Vedanta case, where about 10 to 12 village population, which amounted to something around 5,000 people or less, they decided about the fate of a project, which is as large as about 20,000 crore, which would have probably generated employment for about 10 to 20,000 people directly and about 20,000 people indirectly. Now, Supreme Court giving this kind of decision has really hurted the corporate sentiment and also created unemployment in that area.
Well, see, I'm not going to defend every decision of the Supreme Court because judges are also humans. Some of them can make mistakes. There are many who think that the Vodafone decision of the Supreme Court was wrong. I have not gone into it, but I have met many people who say this should be redone. In fact, the government of India is the principal, arguer of why this Vodafone decision was wrong, and wanted to change the law. But there is no doubt that the principles which the judiciary has laid down now has given confidence to a large number of people who are not in the money field or are not industrialists, but people who care for the democracy of this country, that it's possible to challenge arbitrariness, it's possible to challenge unreasonableness and illegality and malafide, etc. And it's possible to come and express your voice where you feel suppressed. For example, the tribals must have got somebody to represent them through the PIL system. I think you should work this into your system, into your mental makeup, that you can be challenged, and accordingly prepare it. I have not gone into the Vedantam judgment in great detail. I thought that they had on their payrolls for a long time the present finance minister, so they would have got good legal advice. But they have not succeeded. Well, I don't know whether the decision is right or wrong, but I would say I am more on the question of the general principle that the judiciary must intervene when there is arbitrariness.
Sir,
Well, we'd
this
like
is
to say a
Anupam
big
from-
thank you to Dr. Swamy. I know that there are many more questions, but due to a paucity of time. And sir, before we take your leave, we'd like to invite on stage Mr. Motilal Oswal to do us the honors and present a beautiful memento and a bouquet of flowers as well. Ladies and gentlemen, for his truly valuable insights and a wonderful session, we'd like to thank Dr. Subramanian Swamy. Thank you for being here today, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Swamy, thank you so much, sir.